Nice. Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with creators all across the tabletop RPG space, the DMsGuild, and sort of beyond. And as you might be able to tell already, this is something of like a special episode where I'm joined not by one, but two guests. So I would like to welcome both Paige Leitman and Ben Heisler. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, no, it's a privilege. So,
hello.
So I guess I guess the best way to kind of introduce you both would be for you either one or like both of you to say kind of what's your relationship with the DMsGuild? Like what are you sort of known for?
Well, we jumped into it kind of feet first with writing the second adventure for season 5 of the D&D Adventures League, and that was our first product on there, and that was how many years ago, Ben?
It was back in 2016. I had to look it up.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, how long have we been doing stuff on here?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
And
yeah.
I believe, what was it? So season 5, that was Storm King's Thunder?
Storm King's Thunder, and our adventure was actually the first Adventures League adventure to go on the DMsGuild. Natively at that time. Really? They all ended up on there eventually, but ours was the first one that went on while it was going on.
So like a little bit of history then.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so I guess my next question, kind of following on from that, then, is so what got you both working in writing adventures together?
You tell this one.
I mean, I don't even know where to start. Like, we both thought we both did a few things, or we both played a lot of games, and we're like, we could do this. We could do better than this. Yeah. And then we started doing so. It largely started back in 4E. I mean, so Paige was involved in 3.5 with Living Greyhawk, and I'll let her talk about that. I don't know if you did any writing back then, did you?
Only for MetaWorks.
But when it came to 4E, they opened it up with the My Realms project, which allowed writers to kind of make local adventures that had a standard set of rewards and a standard set of like experience and things like that, and then you could tailor it to an experience that you wanted or knew that your local people really wanted to do, and then you could share them. And Paige got into it first with a few adventures, the most noteworthy of which was Jungle Hunt, I believe. Which was actually back in Schult before Schult was cool.
Yeah.
And then we just continued writing various stuff. One of our good friends is a local writer and designer who had a lot to do in 4th edition and leading into 5th edition. And we learned a lot from him. That's Sean Molly, who has been into D&D and writing and adventuring far longer than I've probably been alive, which is shocking to me, at least. But so we learned a lot from him. We did a bunch of writing for various smaller things, and then when the Concreted Content program launched, God, that was even before we were picked for 5, because our first set of Elmwood mods came out in, 2014 or 2015?
Well, it was even weirder than that, because the Concreted Content program, which is an Adventures League program that allows each convention to write Adventures League legal content, came out on the internet, and it was, we had 3 weeks to meet the deadline for DragonCon or something crazy like that. 4 weeks maybe.
I want to say it was 4 or 5. It was still crazy because we had to go from
nothing to finished adventures.
Right.
And in the middle of that, we got asked to write for season 5. So we're having to produce 3 adventures for DragonCon and an adventure for Adventures League kind of all at the same time. It was bananas.
I know the feeling of eventually the avalanche of spinning plates as it sort of builds.
Yeah.
So then I guess to almost dig a little bit into the creative process. How do you guys divvy up an adventure? How do you split that?
it's different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last Adventures League adventure we wrote was 9/17 in the hand for the Avernus season, and with that we got a very specific outline.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, I'll write this part, you write that part. I'll write this part, you write that part.
Yeah.
But for other things we've written, like the Black Road, we wrote it every bit together.
Interesting. And then I guess like, so that kind of leads into my next question nicely. It's like, so between like obviously writing for, what was it? So I think like seasons 8, season 9, season 5, like when you guys started, how has writing for the different seasons differed? Has it sort of been kind of like a consistent thing, or has it always been like a, you know, like a?
And so there are parts of it that are consistent. Wizards and the AL team have done a great job of going from a very open scatter approach that led to a lot of inconsistencies between adventures to a more streamlined process that gives you a much tighter outline that tells you what they're looking for and what percentages and things like that. So when we started back in season 5, it was like the Wild West. We got like, was it even a page of stuff that said...
It's like a half page.
It was like a half page of, here are the, 3 or 4 big themes. Here's the 1 or 2 sentence overview of what you're doing, like where you're starting and what the shtick is, and go. So it was almost like so wild of a canvas you could get lost and tie yourself up with. And now with the more recent stuff we've done, they give you a longer, more fleshed out outline of what they're looking for in each different part of the adventure, usually broken out into 2-hour sections, what the major themes they want to see, what the major themes for the whole campaign for the year are, and things like that.
And so even kind of what encounters they want to see.
Yeah, there's some of that.
Yeah.
But the idea is that it'll lead to more consistent and tighter storylines, because especially with the adoption of legacy events instead of story awards, there's now things that like they'll either give me legacy events that they know are going to pop up 2 or 3 adventures later, so that they can have that follow through of story. And also as an author, I can say, hey, I had this really cool idea. It'd be really awesome if this thing I'm putting in can be picked up by another author, and the communication between authors has gotten a lot better too. One of the things that we kind of helped pioneer a bit back in season 5 was getting Slack groups together for all of the authors so that we could share ideas and bounce things off of each other and get each other to look at each other's work.
Yeah, I was going to say,
and it helps with consistency, so that if I'm writing an adventure that has X, and then Ben's writing the next adventure that has Y, we got to make sure the third person in the trilogy has both X and Y, and there's a logical follow through.
Yeah, I was going to say, as like an outsider of like the Adventure League, it does seem like the shift of having like a thread going through them has kind of like kind of grown and sort of like
Yeah.
I was about to say matured. I don't know if that's the right word to sort of phrase it, but.
No, I think it is, because any organized play system is an experiment.
Yep.
And as a scientist, I can tell you 100%, you got to try a lot of things that absolutely do not work before you find the things that do.
So I guess to tap onto that then, so what is currently, like with going into, I guess, well, season 9 at the moment, going into season 10 with release of Rime of the Frost Maiden?
Yep.
That's it. Nice. Woo. What's with the sort of the templates and stuff that the Adventure League team are kind of providing? What's working well at the moment?
Well, I don't think they've announced the authors for season 10 yet. So,
I meant season 9. Like season 9 that we know at the moment. Yeah, I don't want to no breaking NDAs or anything like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just about to say, well, there's a dearth of information on season 10, but with season 9, one of the things that I see that is working really well is they had kind of an idea from the start, and every adventure is a segment of that main idea. And what do you think, Ben?
I agree with that. With season 9, they're there was definitely a tighter thread and throughput, especially since our 2 adventures were tier 3 adventures taking part in the same dungeon. And how they flowed together and connected was very important, and that there was consequences from one to the other that followed through were also super important. And I think that when you have this turn towards trilogies that AL has shifted more towards, where the stories can be a tighter grouping, you end up with a better experience for the players and also for the DM, because the DM can see how, especially if they run all 3 parts, can see how it all flows together into a larger story.
And I guess so. Obviously, the moment like writing an adventure in isolation without the sort of being aware of like what came before it, what became after it, is like one thing. What are some of the things that you both do to sort of, obviously, I imagine communication is key, but like, at least for like important NPCs and sort of like mannerisms and stuff like that, how do you keep that consistent? Like how?
So, honestly, it's the Slack group, because it's like, hey, how did you handle General Everbleed, who's a big bad guy in season 9? How did you handle General Everbleed? What are they like? What are their mannerisms? How do they think? And we can talk to the previous officers and see what they did. And that makes it a lot easier. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
Definitely not perfect, but it's much easier to have that consistency.
And there's also delving into past content. So one of the things that we have the advantage of in working frequently in the realms is that there is such a backlog of history in the realms. And some of it's even good.
Some of it.
But some of it. But it's nice where you can reach out and grab pieces of history that you can then help it feel like it belongs there. And one leads to a longer amount of research time, both looking at past mods that may have been there in this edition or in past ones, or looking at previous box sets that we've gotten off of DMsGuild to look at what happened in 2E and 3E. But to give it that sense of continuity, both through communication with other authors and respecting the history, leads to a much better project, I feel.
Yeah.
So actually, it kind of allows me to touch on something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned how, was it Paige, you wrote for something like Cholt before it was cool. How, like, I imagine that was before Tomb of Annihilation came out.
It was in 4th edition, so it was before 5th edition came out.
So, I mean, so I imagine as well. So, like, what sort of access to like how did you sort of conduct research for that sort of project?
So the person in charge of Living Forgotten Realms for 4th edition was Sean Molly, who is somebody that we've been playing D&D with for 20-ish years, and he set up the authors. Now, this was back in the dark ages. Like, I had to ride my dinosaur to go to the grocery store to pick up mammoth for dinner. So the internet wasn't as much of a force in it, but we had really good detailed documents from 3rd and 2nd edition for Cholt, and we relied heavily on those to get things right. Fortunately, for the most part, the adventure takes place out in the wilds, and we don't deal with the people in Cholt very much. Some, but not a whole lot, because that to me has been the most problematic part of Cholt.
Yeah, no, and I imagine, just being set in a generally like a nondescript jungle, it kind of gives you that freedom to be like, well, I mean, this is Cholt, but you kind of have the freedom to be like, wading through the things. No, interesting. No, so full disclosure, I'm a 5th edition baby.
Well, that's awesome.
That's all right. 5th edition's a great edition. 5th edition's my favorite edition.
And I think that, so when it comes to
oh,
I feel like there's a bit of a.
I like 5th edition. I like 4th edition a whole lot. Like, we both like 4th edition a whole lot.
The one thing I hear a fair about, at least in conversations talking about 4th edition, a lot of people really like the way skill checks worked, or the skill challenges. And
I mean, so it really depends there, because skill challenges, while they did set up, and we're in Tangent Town now.
No, please, all of us.
Yeah. Choo-choo. So one of the things that skill challenges did was that it made skill checks be a part of the story in a way that was mechanically both satisfying and also reward experience better. Because back in 3.5, it was just like, well, you make a skill check and then you know this, but it didn't tie together very well. And the way the skill challenges made that work, I thought was great. But you ran into the problem a lot of times when you had DMs that would do skill challenges by the numbers, and then would just be like, all right, now what skill do you use? And then turn to the next person and do that, instead of using those skill challenges to weave together or to link in a chain, for instance, how the different skills lead into successes and propel the story forward.
No, and use it as a scaffold for role playing, because that was the whole idea, is that it would be a way to role play and add some roles in there, and you get experience, and it just kind of, which is the exact same thing we did in 3rd edition. It was just a structured format of it, and some people took to it like that, and some people never got it. They just read it to people, and it was miserable. So
I think to almost bring it back around to like adventure writing for 5th edition, I think sometimes there is the like when it comes to writing skill checks, it is sometimes that thing of like, okay, well, which is the most appropriate? And sometimes there's certain skills that kind of overlap or kind of reach the same sort of territory. And it's like, okay, well,
when I DM, I often say things like, make me an I bullshit the tiefling check. And then I'll let the player figure out what they're going to do. Or make me an I sneak past the guards check. And then the player will tell me what skills they need.
And it's much more of a Fate or a Star Trek kind of way of looking at rolling skill checks. Because instead of just saying, I require a nature roll, it's like, I'm going to give you the problems, let you decide how you're working it out. Now, in Adventures League's writings, generally, that's a little harder to parse, but you can still do certain setups where it's like, the characters need to find their way through the fog, and it's a magic fog, and so skills like X, Y, and Z are appropriate, but let the characters say how they're going through. Also reward creativity. If someone says, well, it's a magic fog, I want to use Arcana, then reward them for that. And then, of course, reward additional successes for if you want to use spells or magic items or think outside the box.
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to writing, like I've been writing a fair, like just a load of encounters, just as you do, and somehow trying to find ways to sort of not bust into the old days. Like these aren't the only checks that would work. Obviously, reward creativity where possible. But one thing I also like is like where possible making automatic successes based on like characters like backstory, or I think too. I wrote an adventure kind of based in Kalimshan recently, and it was very much like, oh yeah, no, if your character's like resident, they don't need to make a history check. This is just things that they just innately know. But I imagine, I guess this is a very specific question, but is word count something you guys run into when it comes to like writing Adventures League? Is it quite strict, or is it quite?
It depends. It depends. It used to be really strict in season 5. It was a strict 20,000 words for a 2-hour adventure and 40,000 words for a 4-hour adventure. In season 8, I don't think there was a word limit.
I think there was a word count in 8. No, there wasn't an 8, because in 8 and 9 they switched over to, they wanted to have 1 encounter per page, and so it wasn't so much a word count so much as it was, here are the number of pages that you have to do this adventure.
But whereas on the other hand, with other projects that are not Adventurers League, such as the Forbidden Library or Savage Seas 3 or the Uncaged Project or Eat the Rich, many of which are anthologies, they give you a maximum word limit. And you're like, do I really need the word "be" in that sentence? Can I skip it?
With anthologies, it is a success. You understand why, because obviously if every goes that little bit over, then it just like...
And then you get into issues with layout and making sure everything fits, and
the biggest problem we have ever had with word counts is that we like to write. And getting it below the word count is painful.
And actually, so it's interesting talking about the evolution of Adventures League when they went to season 8 and season 9, season 8 especially, where they were like, no box text.
Oh my God. The wailing and gnashing of teeth.
I was going to say,
it was one of those things where you had to just like twist your mind around, well, how do I do this? How do I make it clear what's most important without giving a script that makes it literally say what's most important to both the GM and the players? And that really changed the way that like I look at encounter design and about and even when they started bringing box text back a little bit in 9, I think they still want it super short, and so you have to embrace brevity and be right to the point, and make sure that the most important things are there, and then you trust the DMs to fill in with the rest, which is a major shift from how we looked at things earlier in 5 and then definitely back in 4.
I mean, I suppose it's so much of it, I imagine, because with Adventure League, there's typically played with a knowing time constraint. It's with DMs who kind of have to pick it up and play it, and then with a group of players that you can't really necessarily, you can never predict the group of players anyway. But I imagine that it is a hard balance of like, okay, well, I suppose you want for the story to make sense, you need to provide so much, but then how much can you trust the DM, I guess?
Well, and that's the great truth of it all, is that I don't care how good or bad my adventure is, it's the DM who makes all the difference, because a good DM can make a really crappy adventure pretty good, but a really substandard DM can make the best adventure like miserable. So you just kind of try to give a middling DM the best tools you can, and then you have to just let your baby go. You got to let it go.
But also, one of the things that they've started allowing us to do a little bit more is with sidebars, especially to kind of help DMs kind of guide them through what it is that you're thinking with the content. And Playing the Pillars does that as well in a very great way, as far as, well, now that they've moved it from being a weird 3-column thing in the middle of a 2-column.
Oh God, that was awful.
Anyways, but I digress. But Playing the Pillars gives you some options, because a lot of times you're like, oh, well, this is a fight. It doesn't need Playing the Pillars. It's like, well, what if it does? What if there's a social way out of this? What can I use in exploration to make it more, A, make the battlefield more interesting, and B, give characters other options rather than I swing my sword at it. So
no, it's kind of fascinating, the fact that both of you have kind of gone through the history of, like, 5e and prior eventually, and how, I guess, so I take it with each sort of season, has it kind of adapted or changed the way that you write and tackle adventures?
Well, we also cheat.
Oh.
I have a dirty secret. I am the evil queen of handouts. Like, our adventures are famous for having a bajillion handouts. So we get around our word count, and we get around our no box text, often with handouts that are supposed to be evocative and give people a visual prop, because we're very visual creatures, a visual prop to help them interact with the material.
Yep.
So okay, fine. Well, what is it? It's a case of like it finds a way, like within the confines. So I guess okay. So to dig a little bit deeper into the creative process, then, is there any part of, like, when it comes to writing like an adventure, then that is your either of your favorites part?
The day we turn it in.
I mean, so for me, it's weird because, like, I love when we get to turn it in and when it's done, but I invariably, like every time, as soon as I have turned it in and it's out of my brain's just like flushing all of that information out. It's just like, hey, you forgot this. And I'm just like, no!
Right?
So if it's really important, I can follow up with the project manager or the editor, or if it's just a cool idea, then I can take it and put it in my little Google Doc of neat ideas that then I can pick through later when I'm trying to figure out something cool.
Yep.
I
I also really like the brainstorming, because since Ben and I are married, we can do things like, hey, let's go sit outside on the porch and get some sun and think about this adventure, or, you know, hey, let's go turn the lights down low and sit on the couch and pet the cats and come up with the best ways to explain this to people.
And before Corona, we would go out and do these things.
Yeah.
Being in a different environment frequently breeds different ideas.
Yeah.
So
we wrote some real good adventures in New Orleans over Christmas.
All right.
2017, 2018.
It all kind of runs together.
But we literally, it's like, hey, it's the week of Christmas. We're going to fly to New Orleans. We're going to take our computers, and we're going to go to different cafes and sit in them and write these adventures. Cafes and bars.
Yeah.
And sit in them and write these adventures. And it was fabulous.
Wow.
Yeah.
So almost like a writing retreat across, like, you know.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess as well, so when it comes to, like, the moments when writing, or, like, you have the freedom to, like, include, like, your own sort of encounter or a particular character, where, like, aside from, like, bouncing ideas off one another, like, what's kind of, like, what do you look for? What do you try and, like, pour into a sort of moment like that?
Do you want to start with that one, Ben? Or do you want me to start with it?
You should probably start, because, like, I'm gonna say like, oh, well, my first idea is to steal a character from pop culture and slightly change them, and then my editor goes, what the fuck were you thinking? And then I change them around.
You can't use the names of characters from Magic in your dungeons. I'm sorry, you just can't.
Why are you the worst? Why are you so mean to me?
I mean, the chances are there's at least one Jace out there somewhere.
Yes.
But no,
sorry, Ben and I are both voracious mediavores. We read a lot of books, we watch a lot of different shows, we play a lot of different video games, and the best way, in my mind, to become a better writer is to read the material that is good in your field. So we end up reading a lot of adventures, we end up playing a lot of adventures, we end up DMing a lot of, well, back when you went to cons and DM things, you know, before, we would DM a lot of adventures at a lot of different cons, and DMing for a bunch of people, and DMing and reading and absorbing different adventures, to me, is what I believe has given me the breadth of experience to make me a creative, good writer.
And I'll tag on to that. And, oh my. And also take it a little bit further, and it's not just 5e. Like, every game that you play that happens to be different, look for things that you can learn from. Especially other organized play campaigns. Like, we've played the Shadowrun organized play campaign. We've played, what was it? Legend of the Five Rings. We played Esper Genesis. We've played Living Tal'Darai. And every time that you walk into something where someone's gone with a different approach and you learn how that works, you're going to find something that's cool that you didn't think of before, that you can figure out a way to work into your own stuff and go from there, whether it's a character or a way that they've described something or a mechanic. There are some really neat spaces in 5e that you can wander into if you don't accept that the only way to do something is this way. There was a Keith Baker 5e adventure, for instance, that instead of just having a list of, if you roll this skill, you learn this, but instead was used this mechanic called success points. And basically it was like a skill challenge, but for 5e, because whatever certain players rolled, whatever they had, that adds to the success points. And when it reaches a certain pool where it doesn't, so for instance, you need X number of points by 2 passes around the table, so almost exactly like a skill challenge in 4e, except for it's before 3 failures before. But by doing that, you don't, like, the guy next to me rolls a 14, I roll a 7. I'm still contributing, maybe not as much, but I'm still moving it forward, rather than being like, well, I tried to do something and I failed. Yeah,
and I must admit, I think that's something that was it, like, in reading a lot of adventures, like just in research so far, is the trying to not get the concept of failing forward at the very least. And always keep it. And I imagine it's probably extra important with Adventure League. You don't want anything to sort of stop the action. You're going to want things to...
Right.
Yeah, so...
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, Fate especially the Dresden Files role-playing game, and then
exactly where I was going.
it's like we're married or something.
Yeah.
And then Trail of Cthulhu by Kenneth Haidt. Really impressed on me. Like, so I love writing investigations and mysteries. And
it's
like
hard.
That.
It's really hard.
And the thing about it is you have to decide, going kind of back to what you said a little bit ago with a skill check, like when do you even call for it? When is it important for and fun for them to roll versus when should they just get it and then have to come up with the decisions about how the pieces fit together? Because at that point, you can later give clues as far as like, well, if the players are struggling, they can roll this check for you to give them a clue. But it's much more exciting for me to say, well, you have this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence, and through your wanderings, they fit together. And what does it mean to you? And in that regard, it often goes back to, and this is going to end up really long, I'm sorry.
No.
But so Paige especially has this really great line about the player characters are always going to slay the dragon and save the princess. The question is, what's it going to cost them and how? And so what we like to set up is areas where you give them the clues, but they have to come to the moral choice as to what to do with them. Or once they have it together, like, do we go through with this? And what does that mean for us as people and for the community that we're serving or the person we're working for if we decide to go this way? And the best thing about tabletop and interactive storytelling is that you get to, instead of watching someone on a screen have these choices and moral decisions where you can sit there and be like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. The players get to be the Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, which is to say the passionates, the logical, and the compassionates that are all right. But they have to figure out a path that goes forward through working together and through compromise. And when the player characters experience that, hopefully they end up learning more about themselves and having empathy towards other viewpoints and other people.
Well, yeah, it's the idea of like it's like a safe simulation to trying to test these sort of situations, even if you are looking at it through the lens of like your character or your thing. I
do want to add that anybody who's looking at writing an adventure in any system should read the Dresden Files role-playing game book about how to create characters, how to create shared character backstories, and how to create cities and how to create plots. I don't care what game you're playing, that will help you be a better writer.
Interesting. Is there like not to, obviously to everyone listening has the homework of going away and reading it, but
no, it's one of the better role playing products to have come out in my lifetime.
What's like one to pull out almost like one tip?
So in Dresden Files, the idea is that your characters know each other. They don't necessarily like each other, but they do know each other. So you go through these different phases of character design and say, hey, when you were young, which one of these other characters did you meet? And what was your relationship like? And those two players have to get together and decide what happened 20 years ago when they were young. And then when you reached the biggest crisis in your life and you had failed, somebody else, one of these other characters, was there when you failed. What happened? Did they help you? Did they laugh? What was that interaction like? And so it has a beautiful system for hooking all the different characters together at a table so that when you finally get to the table in the actual first session of the game, everybody knows a little bit about everybody and a lot about some of the other people, and it creates really lovely tensions, both of friendship and antagonism between the characters. It's gorgeous.
And please.
I was just going to say, and I'll tag on one other thing. They did an amazing job with making setting a character, which is something that we don't see as often in games. Star Trek Adventures does an amazing job of setting as a character, especially with the ship. But Dresden Files did it earlier as far as the places where you live have different aspects, and that affects you, and having to not just think as the characters as characters, but everything around them in the world and making it vibrant and living, breathing.
No, I mean, it kind of like the mention of like the idea of tension. I think that is it's kind of like important to have like an undercurrent of tension, like in just because, especially of like escalating it and building it to like the choice and stuff like that. Because again, to have like a frictionless experience isn't probably going to necessarily be an enjoyable one. However you get the friction in there.
I mean, there's times for popcorn gaming, whether that's sitting back with Call of Duty or just slaying bad guys easily. But those aren't the things you remember or that you talk about with your friends later.
So I suppose it's in all things, moderation in all things. So to cycle back to like one of my earlier questions, then I can ask you like what your favorite part was. What stands out as like the least favorite part of any sort of project?
48 hours before it's due, and I'm having chest pains while Ben is like hitting his stride.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, so it's one of the things that you did put us an idea out of what we should learn earlier, and one of the things that for me continues to be a challenge is committing to writing some every day or every opportunity I have. Because like I'm very deadline driven, and like when I run up against a deadline, whether it's self-imposed or whether it's one that the project manager has given me, like that's when everything is made of sparkles and I come up with all my great ideas, and it's just amazing. But then I'm up until 3 in the morning.
It's so painful to watch. It's so painful to watch.
What is it?
Like I'm super square. Like I'm the kid. Like your book report is due Friday, so mine is ready to go Tuesday night. So I can review it Wednesday and put it in a nice cover on Thursday, so I can present it. No, I gotta have everything done ahead of schedule, or it makes me like it has physical symptoms. Ben is the kind of guy who likes the last week before the deadline a whole lot.
I think I'm very much like you, Ben. I think diamonds are made under pressure, and
there you go. Exactly.
it's it's just I could write it a week before, but that's when everything's suggesting, and I just need the the looming guillotine of a deadline just to sort of
the living guillotine of a deadline. That is art. That is a phrase. I'm writing that down. The living guillotine of a deadline.
But then, so Ben, you wish you could sort of, maybe manage your deadlines a little bit better. What about you, Paige? Or something that you kind of? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it's not that I don't know better. Like, I'm a project manager by training. Like, I know how to do this when I'm in charge of other people and how to make sure that they, meet the deliverables and are making progress and all that stuff. I just like when it comes to me, I'm just like having the discipline, I guess, to sit down and do it is difficult. I'm getting a lot better at it, especially now. COVID time, when there's more time than there was before to think of these things. But it's still difficult, and I still hit that rocket boost right when it's the day or two before deadline.
Like I can't watch. Like I just I have to go do something else. I can't look at it. He's never failed. He's 100%, and it's just frightening to watch. The thing I wish I had learned earlier is you might not know this, but I'm real extra, and and I need to dial down the extra a bit because my native instinct is to micromanage the DM. I write too much, and I give them too much prescriptive stuff to do, and I need to back off, tighten down on my ideas, and make sure my ideas are clear, and then just let the DM do whatever she wants. Like she's going to anyway, so I might as well enable that in the most positive way that I can.
No, 100%. I agree with that. With that, like I over time of writing adventures and releasing them onto like the DMsGuild, I think my mantra has kind of changed to the idea that if they play the adventure as I intend, fantastic. If it's going to be kind of like chunks and part taken out to be inserted into someone else's home, that's perfectly fine too. It's it's rarely going to survive first contact with another table, and
no plan survive. No adventure survives first contact with the players. None.
So it's it's the fact that if even if like the adventure hook at the start is inspiration enough for them to run off in a completely different direction, then that's good enough for me. But then
I know that feeling all too well.
Yeah, and I'm curious as well. So, like, does it come across as much in Adventure League? Because, like, when I don't know why. I just feel like with the sort of like the play structure you have of these sort of adventures, and I feel like every player kind of innately has that more willingness to go along with the sort of the journey or the path that's out for them. Or is it still just as common to be like, oh no, let's just go somewhere completely?
So I think it depends on your DM. A dear friend of mine describes his DMing style as, where we're going, we don't need roads. So he does not care what the Adventures League says. He will probably use some of the same NPCs and some of the same locations with some roughly similar plot elements. But he's not going to be bossed around by a stack of paper. And other DMs are very prescriptive by the book, and the players just follow right along. It's very variable.
And anything to add to that, Ben?
I mean, it largely depends both on the DM and on the table. So I've had experiences at tables where everybody has played a few games, and they kind of know to be a little more willing to go along with things. And I've also been at tables where people are like, oh, what happens if we go over here? And sometimes the DM rolls with it and comes up with great stuff, and sometimes they don't. But I've noticed that more DMs are, and also more players, which I think is interesting as well, are more willing to speak up at a table and say, like, hey, I think the main plot's over here. Let's stick to that, and we can go explore that another time and maybe another session or in your home game. But I've noticed that is a thing that has come up more willing to, especially in organized play and in open gaming, or rather not open, but public gaming, that willingness to see where the story goes rather than wander off on your own. And I mean, home games are amazing places to go wander off on your own.
Yeah.
But when you have a 4-hour time slot to do a mod, not so much, maybe.
So I was going to say, because the point of view that I'm talking from is, so I used to play a fair bit of Adventure League before everything kind of went as it was, and being in the UK, there's not as many, or at least when I started getting into D&D, there's not as many cons about. So coming up, I'm DMing for a con. I'm DMing for Gen Con, and it's my first time doing it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's a bag of nerves because I have my module. I've read it through three times over. I think I'm prepared, but then it's always a case of like, okay, well, what if they go in the completely opposite direction? How do I navigate that sort of thing? I think I'm prepared. I think I'm in doing this podcast and just right. I'm fairly good at sort of blagging it. And,
that and given the context of Adventures League, if you look at your table very honestly and say, close your adventure and say, folks, the place you want to go is super interesting. I don't have content for that. Content I have is over here. I would consider it a personal favor if we could actually play the content I've prepped.
Yeah.
Most tables will be like, okay, fair, we'll go do that thing.
Yeah.
And especially as Adventure League, circling back to way earlier in the conversation, when you're looking at more trilogies and in more ways that there are clear through lines, having a more consistent play experience is super important, because if you go off-roading, you might not meet that NPC that you need to meet. You might not understand how thing in mod A relates to mod B and furthers the story in mod C. So,
Isn't Moon 3-1 at Gen Con, Ben?
10-3 is.
Is that yours?
That is mine.
Ooh.
Yeah. Okay.
Or are you playing it? Are you running it? Is that the mod?
So I'm doing the introduction to Icewind Dale.
Oh, cool.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, cool.
So so I actually had the chance to play a little bit at D&D Live. But so I wasn't aware that one of the other tables at the con is going to be running one of your adventures. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
It'll be more than one table.
Well, maybe it's just one big table. So I guess as well. So obviously with the DMsGuild, the Adventure League content kind of has a. It takes a little while to get through onto the sort of the DMsGuild platform.
Yeah.
Are there some things that you're both waiting on to sort of get on up there?
I mean, yes.
What
I don't know how much
can
we
we
can
talk
talk
about?
about.
Of course. Okay, fair. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's again.
We can talk about that. We owe the DMsGuild 3 Elmwood mods.
Oh yeah, that's something we can talk about. Yep. So there are 3 Elmwood mods that came out a while ago. I'm not going to commit to a year. Thank you very much.
Fair.
But they premiered. We realized it needed some work, and we started working.
Then we got busy on some other stuff.
Yep, and
like you do.
The blessing of COVID. Thank God there's a silver lining to this, is that now we have a little bit of time to go back and update those to Season 9 guidelines so that they are not super bloated with bad box text and with excessive skill rolls and other things that we thought were how things went back in earlier seasons.
That box text is beautiful. There's just too much of it.
Yes. It's not all disappearing. It's just, being edited for clarity and content.
So, forgive me as well. So the was it Elmwood is where in the Forgotten Realms?
It's on the southeast side of the Moonsea between Mulemaster and
Hillsfar.
Yeah. That is the area that Dragon Con, which is a big con in Atlanta in the fall, most years, not this year. That's our CCC area.
I must admit, that's one thing I do love about the CCC is the fact that it almost like large portions of the Forgotten Realms almost gets carved off per con. 99%
of the CCCs out there are written in the Moonsea area, and Elmwood is part of the Moonsea area. There are 2 regions there are 2 cons, basically, which is Gen Con and Origins. No, I lie.
Gen Con. Not 2 cons, but 2 groups.
Two groups. That's a better way to do it.
Because Gamehole Con has Border Kingdoms. I almost called it Band of Kingdoms, just like I do every time.
But I think it's like Gamehole Con, Gary
Con, and I want to say Thomas Valley has another con where those are involved as well. And then
Baldwin Games has the Moonchase, which is Origins, Gen Con, Winter Fantasy.
And we've had the privilege of writing for both.
Yeah.
It's just it's a nice idea to flesh out area because again the Forgotten Realms are so huge and chances are we're probably not going to get a hard cover for every area.
Well, so that leads to a project that we're working on now. I'm excited to talk about. Well, then you talk about it.
It's my question.
It's just funny that the Venn diagram of our brains is a circle.
God, it's almost like we're married or something. Jesus, get a room, Paige.
I was going to say, I wish I cut down my interview time by interviewing you both at the same time, so it's good.
So as you can see on our streaming game, which is twitch.tv Feats and Fables, we are now in Aglarond, which is which borders on the exciting region of Thay, but it is a region that we played a lot in 4E and Living Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
The beautiful things about Living Forgotten Realms is that each of the different areas really came into, through the writing styles, came into this, going back to location as a character. Aglarond had this very almost French feel about how important it was to have farms,
like French countryside,
right, and to protect the forest, all that stuff, and all of that builds off of things written in Forgotten Realms projects forever ago, but then it became a little more real, and now we're making it become a little more real.
Yes, we've updated Aglarond to 5th edition. We have gone through and removed some elements of Ed Greenwood's original vision that we found to be super problematic. And ideally, once Feats and Fables kind of gets it together, we'll be publishing this Agleron document, which will be Agleron for 5th edition. So we'll get to flesh out our own little portion of the realms.
That's fantastic. Like I said, I'm loving these sort of like expansions that sort of occasionally pop up on the DMs Guild, because one and foremost bring them to the 5th edition, and then obviously because again, what is it? How many years ahead of 4th edition are we? It's like a good few hundred-ish.
No, 100. I think
100,
4th edition was 1370 something, 1390 something, and we're in 1493.
Well, depends on when you ask, because some products take place in certain times and some others, but most of them just say time doesn't exactly matter, which is a crazy thing to say when you're like, but I want to understand how my character who was adventuring in Flan in Season 1, where his adventures in Flan take place compared to the things going on now in Waterdeep. And they're like, nah, don't worry about it.
Timey-wimey.
Yeah. And it's a case of like, they just, these characters who are easily over 1,000 years, they just have, potions that extended their life. They're happy.
Oh my god.
Or the elves.
Or the elves, the classic.
Not get us started on that.
Yeah, no, that's one of the first things that we did when we rebuilt Aglerond, is any Ed Greenwood character that's a million years old that might be around there is DED dead.
Mm-hmm.
Out you go.
It's kind of nice, again, because you want to take inspiration from, the past, but you very much as well want to make it your own and, bring in the sort of like,
Ed Greenwood, I have tremendous respect for, and he was writing to a different audience than the one I'm writing for.
And we've all learned so much, like even in the last couple of years, about how we should go about writing and how we should go about cultures and different kinds of people and making sure that they're not stereotypes, for instance.
And that's a relatively new thing in the tabletop community, long overdue. But relatively new within the tabletop community. Relatively new meaning the last decade, and long overdue. So it's all good.
No, again, it sounds like a really exciting project, and from the sounds, it sounds like people could potentially get little sneak peeks by tuning into your stream.
Yep.
Yeah, nice, exciting.
We both have a bunch of dream projects we'd like to write, and now, given COVID, might have time to write.
Nice.
We both got a lot more free time in our lives than we bargained for.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I miss going to cons. I miss having all kinds of social events and things like that. But, like, especially now in the darkest timeline, you have to find the silver linings where you can.
No, exactly.
Yep.
If that silver lining is more stuff out there on the DMs Guild.
Yeah. Then, I have a grand dissertation on gnolls that I have the first, 20 pages written for that I want to flesh out.
Fantastic.
Because I love gnolls.
And the next 1,000 pages are already written in her head.
Oh, yeah. I want to write up a document that has all the Mulharandi deities, which are very similar to Egyptian deities, with warlock pacts for each one of them.
Nice.
I want to write mimics CR 0 to 30.
Of course, yep. The mimic house, the mimic bungalow, all the
mimic Amazon package.
In fairness, you probably could get away with a fair bit of if there's someone you didn't like, just putting a mimic in them or turning their mailbox into a mimic.
Oozes, slimes, and jellies from CR 0 to 30, I think would be fun.
So that's something that I tackled with goblins. I had one of my products was Runa and Ulfgar's compendium of big boss epic goblins, which was essentially taking goblins and then just boosting them up to CR20 and having adventures with them.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'll have to check it out.
And we need more good monsters for high level play. The monster manual, bless its heart, was written kind of before the rules were fully solidified, and I don't feel like the high level monsters were play tested, which means they're kind of weak sauce, which is why I've really enjoyed seeing the monsters out of Theros and Ravnica. So good.
I suppose with all that the years of playtesting now, they kind of know what challenge a level 20 party.
Yep.
No, awesome. Again, so I guess to kind of bring this interview around to a close, because I think we're coming up at time. Is there anyone like in? I'll narrow it down a little bit, maybe just to the Adventure League community, because you're both so much involved in it. Is there anyone who like continually inspires you both, or?
You want that one first, Ben?
I mean, I have a short list, so I can
go for it.
They're not all AL people. But first of all, James Introcaso, he is so prolific and always manages to write stuff where I'm just like, oh, wow. That is great. Jonathan Conner Self is another author that I really enjoy what he puts out.
Yep.
He has a lot of interesting viewpoints from understanding therapy and psychology that can touch on subjects that I wouldn't even think to include in D&D. And he does it so well. Kat Evans is amazing. I don't even know how she manages to juggle all the projects that she does. She's truly like Hamilton. She's
very prolific.
Yeah, she's writing like she's running out of time. Emily Harmon's another one that I like a lot. And then, of course, Oliver Clegg. Again, going off that same realm of, I never would have thought to do this, and it's really cool. And some of it's genius.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I think if you look at like the work output of many of the people you said, it is very much like, wow, that's good, and it kind of borders on concerning. That it's just like, wow, this is like writing every second. But sorry, you're gonna.
I would. Speaking of writing every second, another person that Ben and I respect tremendously and have tremendous personal affection for is Rob Schwall, who wrote all the best parts of 4th and 5th edition, and is still writing. He mostly writes for his own games, which is Shadow of the Demon Lord and Punk Apocalyptic, but he writes a lot of great 5e material under Max Press. Like, he was the one who wrote the Warden for 4th edition, for those of you who like who were arguably the best funnest class to play in 4th edition. He has a 5th edition Warden. He has a 5th edition Battle Master that are great products. And he absolutely writes like he's running out of time.
Yep.
I would also like to give a shout out to Finway Jones, who is a young lady in her teens who has a few projects in the DMsGuild, but her biggest thrust is that she is a community organizer around Jasper's Game Day. She has, in her young teen life, created a sizable charity that gets funding for suicide prevention. And I imagine, like, where I was at 14 or 15,
yeah,
like, she's in just a completely different plane, and she's one of those people that makes me think the kids are going to be all right.
Yeah. It's nice to have those sort of people that you can just be like, we're doing all right. We're kind of no, fantastic. It's kind of like it's not. I like this question. It always gives me the warm fuzzies afterwards. And then I guess going into it, so the stuff that you've kind of said that obviously you mentioned a lot of the projects that you are kind of working on. I imagine a lot of the other stuff you're both currently working on is kind of like NDA, not allowed to talk about necessarily.
I wouldn't know what you're talking about. To quote a famous TV show, it doesn't look like anything to me. That's what I have to say about that. One thing that Ben and I are pouring a whole lot of our energy on that we can talk about is Feats and Fables, which is our Monday night home game, which has been going for... I've had this home game longer than Ben and I have been together. We started off as a podcast, and then COVID. Now we're a live stream Monday nights at 8 p.m. on Twitch, and that is where the bulk of our energies are going right now.
8 p.m. EST?
8 p.m. Eastern US, yes.
Nice, yeah. And I'll make sure that there's a link to that in the description among
all
the other links and stuff to your DMsGuild profiles and whatnot.
Sure.
Yeah, no, again, thank you both so much. So if people want to find out when you're going live and when other sort of exciting projects are coming out, what's the best way for people to sort of hear about your work?
Go ahead, Bennett.
So there's two websites that are the best place to find us as far as things like that. And then, of course, you can also find us on all the social medias. But the two websites are benandpaigewright.com, all one word smushed together. And then also, as Paige just said, you can find us on twitch.tv/Feats and Fables. We also, in addition to the stream, we also have video on demand that comes out a couple days after we get done streaming, and then we push it to podcasts as well. So if you find it easier to just listen to, you can find it anywhere you get your podcasts.
Lovely. And
I'm...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was going to say... No, please continue, sir.
Oh, and then the last... going back to finding us on social media, you can find me on Twitter as @ZentarimPR.
And my Twitter handle is pretty boring. It's @Paige Leitman.
Nice. I was like, should I be worried that you've been a Zentarum agent this whole time? Is that?
I mean, I have
He's been a Zentarum agent a long time.
You have to let me know right now at the end. That's fine.
I mean, that's the way it works. That's how I used to get people to leave their faction and join the Zentarum. Is I would, use words and good deeds, and then they'd be like, "That's what the Zentarum do." I'm like, "Yeah." Don't you wish you were doing that too?
It's kind of funny. I had the chance to play a character the other day that I've been dying to play, which is a cleric, a lawful good cleric who's a follower of Asmodeus, and who is like, no, it's just PR. He's really good. He does great things. It's just a long misunderstanding. I get my powers from him. He has to be good, and just sort of playing it from there.
I can imagine that the demon is or devil is just as confused as he is.
It's like all you need is a strong PR campaign. Speaking of PR, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes and all that good stuff. Very final question then. How do we end a podcast?
You roll for initiative.
See, I was going to say you start talking about music credits.
Oh no! I wish I had the music credits.
I gotcha. 16.
17.
I'm a barbarian. I roll with advantage, but you both beat me because my high is a 12.
I win, and therefore I have the pleasure of ending it. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to tune in same time next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.